The blood had dried into her tangled hair by the time the river's edge became her final resting place. Or so the three men who had beaten her senseless and taken everything she owned believed as they rode away laughing into the scorching Nevada afternoon of 1882. Penelope Lambert's chest rose and fell in shallow, barely perceptible movements, her dress torn and mudded, her face swollen beyond recognition, and her body curled against the rocky bank where the water whispered its indifferent song. Thomas Quinn had not planned to bring his children this far from their small ranch outside Yarrington that day. But his daughter Mary had begged to see where the wildflowers grew thickest, and his son James wanted to practice his fishing in the deeper pools upstream. At 32 years old, Thomas had been raising his two children alone for 3 years now, ever since consumption had stolen his wife Catherine from them in the winter of '79. The ranch work never ended, but he had learned that moments of simple joy with his children mattered more than another fence mended or another field cleared. Mary was 9 now, bright-eyed and curious about everything, while James at 7 possessed a quiet thoughtfulness that reminded Thomas achingly of his late wife. The sun hung heavy in the western sky when James came running back from where he had been casting his line, his fishing pole forgotten on the bank. His face had gone pale beneath its summer freckles, and his words tumbled over each other in his hurry to get them out. "Pa, there's someone by the water. I think she's dead, Pa. There's blood everywhere." Thomas felt his heart clench with dread as he grabbed Mary's hand and followed James back along the river's edge. His first instinct was to shield his children from whatever violence had occurred here, but they had already seen, and he needed to know if whoever lay there might still draw breath. When he rounded the bend and saw the crumpled form of a woman lying half in the shallow water, he felt a wave of anger at the cruelty of men wash over him. "Mary, take your brother back to the wagon right now," he said firmly, already moving toward the woman. "Do not argue with me." For once, his strong-willed daughter obeyed without question, sensing the gravity in her father's voice. Thomas splashed into the cold river water and knelt beside the woman, his experienced hands checking for a pulse at her throat. It was there, faint and thready, but undeniably present. She was alive, though God alone knew how much longer she would remain so without help. He examined her injuries quickly, noting the bruising on her face and arms, the cuts that had bled freely, and the way she lay so utterly still. Someone had hurt her badly and left her here to die. Rage burned in his chest, but he pushed it aside. Right now, getting her back to the ranch and tending her wounds mattered most. Justice could come later. Thomas lifted her carefully from the water, surprised at how light she felt in his arms. She did not stir, did not make a sound, and he worried about what injuries might be hidden beneath her torn clothing. He carried her back to where his children waited by the wagon, their faces anxious and frightened. "Is she going to die, Pa?" James asked quietly. "Not if I can help it, son," Thomas replied, settling the unconscious woman as gently as possible in the wagon bed. He removed his own coat and laid it over her, then climbed up onto the driver's seat. "We need to get home quickly." The ride back to the ranch seemed to take an eternity, though Thomas pushed the horses as fast as he dared over the rough terrain. Mary sat beside him, unusually quiet, while James stayed in the back, watching over the injured woman as if his vigilance alone might keep her alive. Thomas's mind raced through what would need to be done once they arrived home. The wounds would need cleaning, and he would have to check for broken bones. He had tended plenty of injuries over the years, both to his livestock and to his family, but this was different. This was someone who had been deliberately brutalized and abandoned. When they finally pulled up to the modest ranch house, Thomas wasted no time. He carried the woman inside and laid her on his own bed, the best place to keep her comfortable and warm. Mary immediately began heating water without being asked, while James hovered in the doorway, uncertain how to help. "James, I need you to ride into town and fetch Doc Harrison," Thomas said, though he hated to send the boy alone. "Tell him we have an emergency. Can you do that?" The boy straightened his shoulders and nodded solemnly. "Yes, Pa, I'll ride fast." "Be careful," Thomas called after him as James ran out to saddle one of the horses. Then he turned his attention back to the woman on the bed, beginning the careful work of cleaning her wounds and assessing the damage. Her face was swollen, her lips split, and bruises mottled her skin in shades of purple and yellow. Her breathing remained shallow, concerning him greatly. As he worked, washing away the dried blood and dirt, he found himself wondering who she was and what had happened to her. The quality of her dress, though now ruined, suggested she was not some vagrant. She had been someone respectable before violence had brought her to the river's edge. Mary brought the heated water and clean cloths, standing beside her father with a maturity beyond her years. "Will she wake up, Pa?" "I hope so, sweetheart," Thomas said honestly. "But she has been hurt very badly. All we can do now is tend to her and wait." They worked together in the fading light, father and daughter, cleaning wounds and bandaging what they could. Thomas checked her arms and legs for breaks, relieved to find none, though her ribs concerned him. When he pressed gently against her side, even unconscious, she made a small sound of pain. Broken or cracked ribs, most likely. There was little he could do for those except wrap them in hope. By the time Doc Harrison arrived with James, darkness had fallen over the ranch. The gray-haired physician took in the scene with shrewd, experienced eyes and immediately set to work examining the patient. Thomas stood back, letting the doctor do his job, one arm around Mary and the other resting on James's shoulder. "Whoever did this meant to kill her," Doc Harrison said finally, straightening up from the bed. "I'm frankly amazed she is still alive. She has suffered significant trauma, and the next few days will tell us whether she pulls through. Keep her warm, get fluids into her if she wakes enough to swallow, and watch for fever. If infection sets in, we may lose her yet." "I'll watch her," Thomas said firmly. Doc Harrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I know you will, Thomas. You're a good man. Send for me if anything changes." He glanced at the two children standing nearby. "This is a hard thing for young ones to witness." "They found her," Thomas said quietly. "They already know the world can be cruel, but maybe they can also learn that people can be kind." The doctor squeezed his shoulder and departed into the night, promising to return in 2 days to check on the patient. Thomas sent his children to bed, though he knew Mary would have preferred to stay and help. He settled into the chair beside the bed, prepared for a long vigil. Through that first night, Penelope Lambert drifted in darkness, her mind fragmented by pain and trauma. Sometimes she surfaced enough to sense a presence nearby, to feel gentle hands adjusting blankets or touching a cool cloth to her fevered brow, but she could not break through to full consciousness. The darkness pulled at her, seductive in its numbness, but something kept drawing her back toward the light. Thomas dozed fitfully in the chair, waking frequently to check on his patient. Toward dawn, she began to stir, small movements accompanied by sounds of distress. He leaned forward, speaking in low, soothing tones. "You are safe now. You are in my home and no one is going to hurt you. Just rest easy." Whether his words reached her or not, he could not tell, but gradually she settled again. As gray light crept through the window, Thomas heard his children stirring in their room. He went to make breakfast, knowing life on the ranch continued regardless of the drama unfolding in his bedroom. Mary and James came out dressed and ready for the day, their faces anxious. How is she?" Mary asked immediately. "Still with us," Thomas replied, cracking eggs into a pan. "That is all we can ask for now." They ate quickly, then Thomas assigned them their morning chores while he returned to watch over the woman. By mid-morning, she showed more signs of stirring, her eyelids fluttering, small sounds escaping her cracked lips. Thomas carefully spooned water into her mouth, gratified when her throat worked to swallow it. "That is good," he murmured encouragingly. "Take a little more now." He managed to get perhaps half a cup of water into her before she subsided back into unconsciousness. Progress, however small, lifted his spirits. If she could swallow, she could take in fluids and perhaps eventually some broth. That meant she had a fighting chance. The day passed slowly, measured in small tasks and frequent checks on his patient. Mary helped him change the bandages, her small fingers surprisingly deft. James brought fresh water from the well without being asked. Thomas felt a surge of pride in his children, seeing how they rose to meet this crisis with compassion and responsibility. On the second night, fever came. Thomas had been expecting it, dreading it, and when he felt the heat radiating from the woman's skin, his heart sank. He sent Mary for more cool water and spent the long hours of darkness bathing her face and arms, trying to bring the fever down. She thrashed and cried out in her delirium, words he could not quite make out but which spoke of terror and pain. "Please," he found himself praying, though he had not been a particularly religious man since Catherine died. "Please let her live. She has already suffered enough." Toward dawn, the fever broke. Her skin cooled beneath his touch, and her breathing, while still shallow, came more evenly. Thomas slumped in his chair, exhausted but relieved. She had survived another hurdle. Doc Harrison returned as promised and examined her thoroughly. "The fact that she fought off the fever this quickly is encouraging," he said. "She is stronger than she looks. Keep doing what you are doing, Thomas." Give her time. Time, it seemed, was what she needed most. Days blended together in a routine of care and ranch work. Thomas found himself spending every spare moment in the chair beside the bed, watching for signs of improvement, talking to her even though she gave no indication she could hear him. He told her about the ranch, about his children, about the weather and the cattle and the everyday minutiae of his life. It seemed better than leaving her in silence. Mary often joined him, reading aloud from her school books or telling stories about things that had happened during the day. James was more reserved, but he brought wildflowers and placed them in a jar on the bedside table, changed daily with fresh blooms. Their patient remained unconscious, but Thomas began to see subtle improvements. Her bruises faded from purple to yellow-green. The swelling in her face diminished, revealing delicate features beneath. Her breathing grew stronger. On the 8th day after they had found her, Thomas was reading the newspaper aloud, more to fill the silence than anything else, when he noticed her eyelids moving. Not the random flutter of unconscious sleep, but deliberate, purposeful movement. He set the paper aside and leaned forward. "Can you hear me? If you can, try to open your eyes." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, her eyelids lifted. The eyes that met his were a striking blue-green, clouded with confusion and pain, but aware. Aware and terrified. "You are safe," Thomas said immediately, keeping his voice low and calm. "My name is Thomas Quinn. My children and I found you beside the river more than a week ago. You were badly injured. You are at my ranch now, recovering. No one here will hurt you." She stared at him, her breathing quickening, and he could see her trying to process his words, trying to make sense of her surroundings. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged. He reached for the water glass. "Do not try to talk yet. Here, take some water." He helped her raise her head just enough to sip from the glass, supporting her carefully. She drank thirstily, then fell back against the pillows, already exhausted from that small effort. Her eyes remained open, however, fixed on his face. "Do you remember what happened to you?" he asked gently. Pain flashed across her features, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. When she spoke, her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, rough from disuse. "3 men. Stagecoach stopped. They said the wheel needed fixing. When we got out, they—" She closed her eyes and a tear slipped down her cheek. "They took everything, beat the driver, beat me when I tried to run. I thought they were going to kill me." "They left you for dead," Thomas said quietly, anger burning in his chest again at the thought. "But you survived. You are strong." "I do not feel strong," she whispered. "I feel broken." "You will heal," he promised. "It will take time, but you will heal." Her eyes opened again, studying him with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been cautious hope. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Thomas said simply. "What kind of man would I be if I left you to die when I could help?" She seemed to have no answer for that. Her eyelids drooped, exhaustion claiming her again. "Thank you," she managed before sleep took her once more. But this sleep was different, Thomas could tell. This was natural, healing sleep, not the unconsciousness of severe trauma. Relief flooded through him so intensely it left him shaking. She was going to survive. Against all odds, she was going to make it. He went to tell his children the good news, finding them in the kitchen where Mary was attempting to teach James to knead bread dough. Their faces lit up when he told them the woman had woken and spoken. "What is her name, Pa?" Mary asked. Thomas realized he had never asked. In his relief at her waking, he had not thought to inquire. "I do not know yet," he admitted. "She was too tired to talk much, but we will find out when she wakes again." The next time Penelope opened her eyes, late afternoon sun slanted through the window, painting the unfamiliar room in gold. She lay still for several minutes, taking stock of her body. Everything hurt, but it was the sharp, healing hurt of injuries mending, not the overwhelming agony she vaguely remembered from before. Slowly, carefully, she turned her head, taking in her surroundings. The room was simple but clean, furnished with well-made if plain furniture. The bed she lay in felt comfortable, the quilts covering her clearly handmade. On the bedside table sat a jar of fresh wildflowers beside a water glass. Through the window, she could see open land stretching to distant mountains, the landscape harsh but beautiful in its own way. The door opened quietly, and the man who had been there before entered. In the better light, she could see him more clearly now. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes the color of warm honey. His face was weathered from sun and wind, lined at the corners from squinting against bright skies, but kind. He looked surprised to find her awake. "You are up," he said, a smile crossing his features. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was beaten and left to die," Penelope said, attempting a weak smile of her own and wincing when it pulled at her split lip. "But better than I imagine I felt a week ago." "You said your name was Thomas." "Thomas Quinn," he confirmed, moving to the chair beside the bed. "And I never got yours." "Penelope Lambert," she replied. "I was traveling from San Francisco to Carson City. My father recently passed, and I was going to live with my aunt there." She paused, swallowing hard. "Everything I had was in my trunk on that stagecoach. All my father's papers, what little money we had saved, my mother's jewelry. All gone now." "I am sorry," Thomas said, and she could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "When you are stronger, we can contact the authorities, let them know what happened. Though I will be honest with you, men who do what they did rarely face justice out here." "I know," Penelope said quietly. She had lived in the West long enough to understand how things worked. "How long have I been here?" "This is the 9th day since we found you," 9 days. She had lost 9 days to darkness and pain. The thought was staggering. I need to contact my aunt, let her know I am alive. She will be worried when the stagecoach arrives without me, if it ever does. We can send a telegram from Yarrington, Thomas assured her. Once you are well enough for the trip into town. Right now, you need to focus on getting better. He hesitated, then added, I know this is not ideal, staying with strangers, but you are welcome here as long as you need. I have been sleeping in the barn, so you have privacy, and my daughter Mary has been helping with the more personal aspects of your care. Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks, embarrassment at her helplessness flooding through her. She was beholden to these people, dependent on their charity, and she hated it even as she was grateful for it. I do not know how I can ever repay you for your kindness. I am not asking for repayment, Thomas said firmly. You needed help and I could provide it. That is all there is to it. Before Penelope could respond, she heard the sound of running feet, and 2 children burst into the room. They stopped short when they saw her awake, suddenly shy. The girl was perhaps 9, with her father's dark hair and warm eyes, while the boy looked younger, maybe 7, with a dusting of freckles across his nose. Mary, James, come meet Miss Lambert, Thomas said, beckoning them forward. She is awake and feeling better. The children approached cautiously, and Penelope found herself smiling despite her pain. You must be the ones who found me, she said softly. James saw you first, Mary said, finding her voice. We thought you were dead, but Pa checked and said you were still breathing. Then I owe all of you my life, Penelope said, emotion tightening her throat. Thank you does not seem like enough, but thank you. We are glad you are better, James said quietly. I was worried you would not wake up. Something about the boy's solemn concern touched Penelope deeply. These children had witnessed her at her worst, had seen violence and its aftermath, and yet here they stood with compassion and hope in their eyes. Their father had clearly raised them well. I am going to be just fine, she told him with more confidence than she felt. Thanks to all of you. Over the following days, Penelope grew stronger. Thomas helped her sit up, then eventually stand with support, taking careful steps around the room. Mary brought her meals and sat with her for hours, chattering about school and the ranch and everything under the sun. James was quieter but brought her small gifts, pretty stones from the river, more wildflowers, a bird's nest he had found empty on the ground. Their kindness surrounded her like a warm blanket, helping her heal in ways medicine never could. Thomas fascinated her most of all. He was gentle but capable, patient but firm when she pushed herself too hard. He told her about his late wife, about building this ranch with his own hands, about the struggles and small triumphs of raising 2 children alone. In turn, she found herself sharing her own story, how her mother had died when she was young, how her father had worked himself to exhaustion trying to make a better life for them in San Francisco, how his death from a sudden heart attack had left her alone in the world, except for an aunt she barely knew. I was terrified of going to Carson City, she admitted one evening as they sat together in the twilight, her strength finally sufficient for her to leave the bedroom and sit in the main room of the house. Terrified of being dependent on family who might resent having to take me in. But now I have to go if my aunt will still have me after all this. Why would she not? Thomas asked, looking up from the harness he was mending. Because I have nothing now, Penelope said bluntly. No money, no possessions, nothing to contribute. I am just another mouth to feed, another burden. You are not a burden, Thomas said firmly. Anyone who would see you that way is not worth knowing. His certainty warmed something inside her that had been cold for longer than she cared to admit. She watched him work, his hands strong and sure, and felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. She was drawn to him, she realized with some surprise. drawn to his quiet strength, his kindness, the way he loved his children so openly and fiercely. It was both thrilling and terrifying. 2 weeks after waking, Penelope was well enough for the trip into Yarrington. Thomas drove the wagon while she sat beside him, Mary and James in the back. The town was small but bustling, a mix of miners, ranchers, and merchants going about their business. Thomas helped her down from the wagon carefully, his hand steadying her elbow, and they made their way to the telegraph office. Penelope composed a brief message to her aunt, explaining what had happened and where she was. The response came back within a few hours while they waited in the general store, and when the clerk read it aloud, Penelope felt her heart sink. "Penelope, sorry to hear of your misfortune. Unfortunately, my circumstances have changed since we last corresponded. My husband's business failed and we are returning east to live with his family. I cannot take you in. Perhaps you can find work there in Nevada. Best wishes, Aunt Margaret." The words hit her like a physical blow. She was alone, truly alone, with nowhere to go and no resources to get there even if she had a destination. She must have swayed because suddenly Thomas's arm was around her waist, supporting her. "Easy now," he murmured. "Let us get you outside where you can sit down." He guided her to a bench outside the store and she sank onto it gratefully, fighting back tears. Mary and James crowded close, their faces worried, and Penelope tried to pull herself together for their sake. "I am all right," she managed. "Just a shock, that is all." Thomas crouched in front of her, his eyes searching her face. "What did the telegram say?" "My aunt cannot take me in," Penelope said flatly. "They are leaving Nevada, going back east. She suggested I find work here." She laughed, a bitter sound. "Find work? I have no references, no skills beyond basic household management, and I am recovering from injuries that nearly killed me. Who would hire me?" "You could stay at the ranch," Mary blurted out before her father could speak. "Could she not stay, Pa? We have room and she is nice, and she helps with cooking and everything." Thomas straightened, studying Penelope with an expression she could not quite read. "Mary is right. You could stay, at least until you decide what you want to do next. We have the space, and honestly, having another adult around has been helpful." Pride warred with desperation inside Penelope. She did not want to be a charity case, did not want to impose on these people who had already done so much for her. But what choice did she have? "I could not just stay without contributing something. Perhaps I could work for you, earn my keep. I can cook and clean, help with the children, whatever you need." "You do not need to work off some imaginary debt," Thomas said quietly. "But if it would make you feel better to help around the ranch, I certainly would not refuse. Lord knows Mary and I have been managing, but it has not been easy since Catherine passed." The mention of his late wife made Penelope's decision easier somehow. He was offering her a place, a purpose, not just charity. "Then I accept gratefully, and Thomas, thank you. I know I keep saying that, but I mean it." "You are welcome," he said simply, offering her his hand to help her up. "Now let us get you back home before you wear yourself out." Home. The word resonated through her as they made the journey back to the ranch. Somewhere along the way, in the midst of pain and recovery, this place had started to feel like home. The children chatted excitedly in the back of the wagon, clearly pleased that Miss Lambert would be staying, and Penelope found herself smiling despite everything. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. As Penelope's strength returned, she took over more of the household duties, finding satisfaction in keeping the house clean and preparing meals for the family. She discovered that she enjoyed cooking, experimenting with the limited ingredients available, and taking pride when Thomas and the children praised her efforts. She helped Mary with her schoolwork and listened patiently to James's rambling stories about the animals he observed around the ranch. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, she and Thomas grew closer. It started with conversations in the evening after the children had gone to bed, sitting together on the porch and talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, his worries about raising his children without their mother, his fears that he was failing them somehow. She shared her own uncertainties, her grief for her father, her determination to build a new life despite the violence that had nearly destroyed her. One night, nearly a month after her arrival, Thomas reached over and took her hand as they sat watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The gesture was simple, innocent even, but it sent electricity racing through Penelope's entire body. She looked at him, found him already watching her, and in his eyes she saw the same confused wonder she felt. "Penelope," he said quietly, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I know this is probably too soon, and maybe I am out of line for even saying this, but I need you to know. Having you here, it has changed things. Changed us, me and the kids. We are happier. I am happier. And it is not just because you help around the house. It is you, just you." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Thomas, I feel the same way. I did not expect this, did not think I could feel this way again after everything that happened. But when I am with you, I feel safe. I feel like myself again, only better somehow." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, courtly, and it made her feel cherished in a way she had never experienced before. "I do not want to rush you or make you feel pressured. You have been through so much, and you are still healing. But I want you to know that my feelings are real, and they are not going anywhere." "I know," Penelope whispered. "Mine too." They sat together in comfortable silence after that, hands entwined, both marveling at how life could bring such unexpected joy even in the wake of tragedy. Inside the house, the children slept peacefully, and across the range island, the night breeze carried the scent of sage and possibility. As summer deepened into the intense heat of July, Penelope felt herself blooming along with the hardy desert flowers that dotted the landscape. Her injuries had healed completely, leaving only faint scars that served as reminders of how close she had come to death. But those scars did not define her. Instead, she focused on the life she was building here with Thomas and his children. Mary had taken to following her around like a shadow, soaking up what Penelope remembered of her own education and the social graces her father had insisted she learn. The girl was bright and eager, and Penelope felt a maternal fondness for her that both surprised and delighted her. James was more reserved, but he clearly trusted her, bringing her his small hurts and worries the way he might have brought them to his own mother. One afternoon, while Thomas was out checking the cattle with James, Mary approached Penelope with unusual shyness. They were sitting together on the porch, shelling peas for dinner, and Mary had been quieter than usual. "Miss Lambert," she finally said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. You can ask me anything." Mary studied the pea pods in her lap intently. "Do you like my pa?" "I mean, do you like him the way Ma used to like him?" Penelope felt her cheeks warm, but she refused to lie to the child. "I do," she said honestly. "Your father is a wonderful man, and I care about him very much. Does that bother you?" "No," Mary said quickly, looking up with hopeful eyes. "I want you to like him. I want him to be happy again. He smiles more now since you came. And James and I, we like having you here. It feels like having a ma again, only different, if that makes sense." Tears pricked Penelope's eyes. "It makes perfect sense, and I am honored that you feel that way. I need you to know that I would never try to replace your mother. She will always be your ma, and she will always be important. But maybe there is room for me too, in a different way." Mary launched herself at Penelope, hugging her tightly, and Penelope held her close, stroking her hair and feeling her heart expand with love for this brave, kind child. That evening, after the children were in bed, Penelope told Thomas about the conversation. They were sitting on the porch again, their usual spot, close enough that their shoulders touched. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing what she had shared. "They love you," he said finally. "I can see it every day, the way they look at you, the way they go to you for comfort. It means everything to me that you have been so good to them, that you understand they still love their mother." "Of course they do," Penelope said softly, "and they should. But Thomas, I need you to know something. I have come to love them too, and I have come to love you. I did not plan for this, did not expect it, but I cannot deny it anymore." Thomas turned to face her fully, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Penelope, I love you too. I have been falling in love with you since the day you woke up and looked at me with those beautiful eyes. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you have made this house feel like a home again. I know we have not known each other long, but I know my heart, and my heart is yours if you will have it." "Yes," Penelope breathed, leaning into his touch. "Yes, Thomas, my heart is yours too." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, a promise of everything they could be together. Penelope felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, tears of relief and joy and wonder at finding love in the most unexpected place. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "I want to do this properly," Thomas said. "I want to court you the way you deserve, and when the time is right, I want to marry you. If you will have me and my children, I promise I will spend the rest of my life making you happy." "You already make me happy," Penelope assured him. "But yes, I want to be courted, and yes, when the time is right, I want to marry you. I want to be part of this family, officially and forever." The courtship that followed was sweet and earnest. Thomas was attentive and romantic in ways that surprised Penelope, bringing her small gifts from town, taking her on picnics with the children, stealing kisses when they had moments alone. They talked for hours about their future, making plans for the ranch and their family. Penelope taught Thomas to dance in the kitchen one evening while the children clapped along, and though he was clumsy at first, he learned, holding her close and spinning her around until they were both laughing and breathless. Doc Harrison stopped by one day in late August to check on Penelope, pleased to find her in glowing health. As he was leaving, Thomas walked him out to his buggy, and the doctor gave him a knowing look. "You are going to marry her, are you not?" he asked bluntly. Thomas did not bother to deny it. "I am. Just trying to find the right moment to ask properly." "Do not wait too long," Doc Harrison advised. "Life is short and uncertain, as that young woman knows better than most. When you find happiness, you should seize it with both hands." The word stayed with Thomas, and that evening he made his decision. He cleaned up after dinner and asked Penelope to take a walk with him, leaving the children under Mary's watchful eye. They walked out to where the land rose slightly, offering a view of the sunset painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "Penelope," Thomas began, taking both her hands in his, "I know we have not been together long by conventional standards. 4 months ago, you were lying half dead by the river, and I was just trying to keep you alive. But these past months with you have been the happiest I have known since Catherine died. You have brought joy and light back into our home, and more than that, you have brought love. The children adore you, and I love you more than I thought possible to love someone." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold ring. "This was my mother's ring. She gave it to me before she passed and told me to give it to a woman worthy of it. Penelope Lambert, you are more than worthy. You are brave and kind and strong, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and a mother to Mary and James?" Penelope was crying openly now, but she was also smiling, her face radiant in the sunset light. "Yes, Thomas. Yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you, and I love your children, and I want nothing more than to be your wife." Thomas slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been meant for her all along. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and hope and promise into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning foolishly, deliriously happy. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they told the children, Mary squealed with delight and threw her arms around both of them. James was more reserved, but his smile was genuine, and he hugged Penelope tightly, whispering, "I am glad you are going to be our new ma." "Me too," Penelope whispered back, holding him close. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Yarrington. Doc Harrison stood up for Thomas, and Mary served as Penelope's attendant, beaming with pride in her new dress. James carried the rings solemnly, his face serious with the importance of his task. The minister spoke about love and commitment and the binding of families, and when Thomas and Penelope exchanged their vows, there was not a dry eye in the small congregation. Penelope wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Thomas had insisted on buying for her in town, simple but elegant in cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar. Mary had helped her arrange her hair, weaving wildflowers through the dark strands. She had never felt more beautiful than she did standing beside Thomas, feeling his hand warm and steady in hers as they pledged their lives to each other. The kiss that sealed their marriage was sweet and lingering, and the small gathering of ranchers and townspeople who had come to witness the ceremony applauded warmly. Everyone knew the story of how Thomas had found Penelope dying by the river, and the romantic tale of their courtship had captured hearts throughout the community. Here was proof that good could triumph over evil, that love could bloom even in the harshest circumstances. They held a small reception at the ranch, with food and music and dancing under the stars. Penelope danced with her new husband, with James, with Doc Harrison, and with several of the neighboring ranchers who congratulated her warmly. Mary danced with her father and beamed at everyone, clearly thrilled with the day's events. As the evening drew to a close and their guests departed, Thomas and Penelope stood together watching the last wagon disappear down the road. The children had finally exhausted themselves and gone to bed, leaving the newlyweds alone under the vast Nevada sky. "Are you happy, Mrs. Quinn?" Thomas asked, pulling her close against his side. "Happier than I ever imagined possible, Mr. Quinn," Penelope replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "When I was lying by that river dying, I could not have dreamed that just a few months later I would be here, married to a wonderful man with 2 beautiful children to love. It seems almost impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Thomas said, turning to face her and lifting her chin so their eyes met. "You survived because you are strong. We found each other because we were meant to, and we will build a beautiful life together because we choose to every single day." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, a husband claiming his wife, and Penelope surrendered to it gladly, knowing she was finally, truly home. When they finally went inside and closed the door behind them, the ranch house seemed to settle around them with a sense of contentment, as though even the building itself was pleased with this new arrangement. The months that followed their wedding were a time of adjustment and joy. Penelope fully embraced her role as wife and mother, finding fulfillment in caring for her family and managing the household. She discovered she had a talent for the practical aspects of ranch life, learning to preserve food for the winter, to doctor minor injuries in both humans and animals, to manage the complex logistics of running a working ranch. Thomas was an attentive and loving husband, always considerate of her needs and never taking her presence for granted. He involved her in decisions about the ranch, valuing her opinions and insights. They worked side by side during the busy autumn months, preparing for winter, and Penelope felt her love for him deepen with each passing day. Mary and James adapted beautifully to having Penelope as their mother. Mary sometimes slipped and called her Ma, then would catch herself and apologize, but Penelope always told her it was fine, that she was honored by the title. James was less verbal about his feelings, but he showed his affection in countless small ways, seeking her out when he was hurt or troubled, bringing her gifts from his explorations, sitting close to her in the evenings as she mended clothes or read aloud. Winter came early that year, bringing snow to the high desert and testing the family's preparations. But the house was warm and well-stocked, and the family was happy. They spent long evenings together by the fire, playing games, telling stories, simply enjoying each other's company. Thomas taught Penelope to play chess, and she taught the children songs her father had taught her long ago. One evening in January, as they celebrated what would have been their 4-month anniversary, Penelope shared news that filled the household with excitement. She was pregnant, expecting a baby in late summer. Thomas was overjoyed, holding her close and kissing her tenderly while Mary and James danced around the kitchen in celebration. "A brother or sister," Mary said excitedly. "Oh, I hope it is a sister, but a brother would be wonderful too." "I hope it is a brother," James countered. "Then we would be even, 2 boys and 2 girls." Penelope laughed at their enthusiasm, one hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "Brother or sister, this baby will be lucky to have all of you as family." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the cold months and into the spring. Penelope bloomed with impending motherhood, and Thomas was almost comically protective, fussing over her and trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work. She tolerated his concern with good humor, touched by his devotion. As her belly grew round with new life, Penelope sometimes thought back to that day by the river, to how close she had come to never experiencing any of this. The men who had attacked her were never caught, never brought to justice, but she found she could not spare them much thought anymore. They had taken material things from her, had hurt her body, but they had not broken her spirit. And in a strange way, their violence had led her to this place, this family, this life she loved. She shared these thoughts with Thomas one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her swollen belly, feeling their child move beneath his palm. "I do not forgive them for what they did," she said quietly, "but I am grateful for where it led me. Is that strange?" "No," Thomas said thoughtfully. "I think it just means you have chosen to focus on the good that came after rather than the evil that came before. That takes strength, Penelope." "Real strength." "I had good teachers," she said, turning to kiss him softly. "You showed me what it means to choose kindness. Your children showed me what it means to hope. This family saved my life in more ways than one." Their son was born on a hot August day in 1883, almost exactly a year after Penelope had awakened in Thomas's bed, battered but alive. The birth was long and difficult, and Thomas paced the main room frantically while Doc Harrison attended Penelope in the bedroom, Mary and James staying with a neighbor. When he finally heard the strong cry of a newborn, Thomas sagged with relief. Doc Harrison emerged looking tired but pleased. "You have a healthy baby boy, Thomas, and Penelope did wonderfully. She is strong, that wife of yours." Thomas rushed into the bedroom to find Penelope propped up against the pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, their son cradled in her arms. He had a downy covering of dark hair and his mother's delicate features, and when he opened his eyes, They were a murky blue-gray that would eventually settle into their true color. "He is perfect," Thomas breathed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby's fingers curled around his, gripping with surprising strength, and Thomas felt his heart expand to make room for this new love. "What should we name him?" Penelope asked, looking up at her husband with tired but happy eyes. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Thomas knew exactly what felt right. "Theodore," he said. "Theodore Quinn. We can call him Theo." "Theo," Penelope repeated, testing the name and smiling. "It is perfect." "Hello, little Theo. Welcome to the family." When Mary and James met their new brother the next day, they were enchanted, taking turns holding him carefully under Penelope's watchful supervision. Mary declared him the most beautiful baby she had ever seen, while James studied him seriously and pronounced him acceptable. "He is so small," James said wonderingly. "Was I ever that small?" "You were," Thomas assured him, ruffling his son's hair affectionately. "And now look at you, almost a man." The weeks after Theo's birth were chaotic but joyful. The baby was healthy and strong, eating well and growing rapidly. Penelope recovered quickly from the birth, and soon the household settled into a new routine that accommodated the needs of an infant. Thomas helped with the nighttime feedings, bringing Theo to Penelope, and then staying awake with her, keeping her company in those quiet, dark hours. Mary was an enthusiastic helper, always wanting to hold her baby brother or help change him or sing to him. James was more reserved but clearly besotted, often sitting near the cradle just watching Theo sleep. Penelope felt overwhelmed with gratitude watching her family embrace this new addition so completely. As summer faded into autumn and then winter, the family thrived. The ranch was doing well, bringing in enough profit to allow for some improvements Thomas had long wanted to make. They added a room to the house, giving Mary her own space as she grew older, and made plans for more expansion in the spring. Theo grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby who smiled easily and rarely cried. One evening in late December, as they celebrated both Christmas and Theo's upcoming 6-month milestone, Penelope looked around at her family gathered in the warm, firelit room and felt tears of happiness well up. Thomas, noticing, squeezed her hand gently. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About how far we have come," Penelope replied. "It has been less than 2 years since you found me by that river. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. But Thomas, I want you to know that every single day since then has been a gift. You gave me back my life, and then you gave me so much more. This family, this home, this love. I am so grateful." "I am the grateful one," Thomas insisted, pulling her close. "You brought light back into our lives when we badly needed it. You are an amazing mother to all our children, and you are the love of my life. I thank God every day that James wanted to go fishing that afternoon." They kissed, long and sweet, while around them their children played and laughed. Mary was teaching James a complicated card game while Theo babbled happily from his spot on a blanket, surrounded by wooden toys Thomas had carved for him. It was a perfect moment, ordinary and extraordinary all at once, and Penelope knew she would treasure the memory of it forever. Life continued its steady rhythm through the seasons. Theo took his first steps in the spring of 1884, much to everyone's delight, toddling unsteadily between his parents while his siblings cheered. Mary turned 11 and started helping more seriously with the ranch work, showing a real aptitude for managing the accounts. James at 9 was quieter than ever but deeply thoughtful, spending hours exploring the rangeland and coming home with stories about everything he had observed. Thomas and Penelope's love continued to deepen with time, the initial passionate romance settling into something even more precious, a steady, reliable partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. They worked together, raised their children together, made decisions together. When disagreements arose, they talked them through calmly, always prioritizing their family and their future. In the summer of 1885, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and she barely slowed down even as her belly grew. Their second son, Timothy Quinn, was born in February of 1886, a big, lusty baby with Thomas's honey-colored eyes and Penelope's dark hair. Theo, now 2.5, was fascinated by his new brother, constantly wanting to touch him and help care for him. Mary and James, now 12 and 10 respectively, were experienced older siblings by this point and pitched in readily with the new baby's care. The house was full and loud and sometimes chaotic, but it was also full of love. One spring evening in 1886, 4 years after that terrible day by the river, Penelope and Thomas sat on their porch watching the sunset while their children played in the yard. Theo was chasing butterflies with intense concentration, while Timothy dozed in Penelope's arms. Mary and James were working together to build something out of scrap wood, their heads bent close as they discussed their project. "You ever think about those men?" Thomas asked suddenly, surprising Penelope with the question. They rarely spoke of the attack anymore. Penelope considered the question carefully. "Not often," she admitted. "Sometimes I wonder what became of them, whether they ever faced any consequences for what they did. But mostly I just feel sorry for them. They live in a world where violence and cruelty are their tools, where they take what they want without regard for the pain they cause. That must be a terrible way to live." "You are remarkably forgiving," Thomas observed. "Not forgiving," Penelope corrected gently. "But I refuse to let what they did define the rest of my life. They hurt me, nearly killed me, but they failed. I survived, I found you, I built this beautiful life. They do not get to take any more from me, not even my peace of mind." Thomas leaned over and kissed her temple. "You are the strongest person I know." "I learned from the best," Penelope said, smiling at him. "You taught me that strength is not just about surviving, but about choosing to live fully despite what you have survived. You did that after Catherine died, raising your children and building this ranch even though you were grieving. I just followed your example." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Timothy stirred and whimpered, and Penelope automatically adjusted him, rocking gently until he settled again. In the yard, Mary called out something that made James laugh, a rare and beautiful sound. Theo abandoned his butterfly hunt to run to his father, climbing into Thomas's lap and babbling about his adventures. This was happiness, Penelope thought. This simple, ordinary, extraordinary life they had built together. From tragedy and violence had grown something beautiful and strong, a family bound not just by blood but by choice and love and shared experience. As the years continued to pass, the Quinn family flourished. The ranch expanded, becoming one of the more successful operations in the region. Thomas and Penelope became respected members of the Yarrington community, known for their kindness and generosity. They took in a young hand who needed work and treated him fairly, earning his fierce loyalty. They helped neighbors in times of trouble and celebrated with them in times of joy. Mary grew into a poised young woman, eventually leaving for teachers' college in San Francisco with her parents' blessing and support. James discovered a talent for working with horses and began building a reputation as someone who could gentle even the most difficult animals. Theo and Timothy grew up close, partners in mischief and adventure, keeping their parents on their toes. Through it all, Thomas and Penelope remained deeply in love, their bond strengthening with each challenge overcome and each joy shared. They added more children to their family, 3 more in all, until the house truly overflowed with noise and laughter. Each child was loved and cherished, raised with the same values of kindness, honesty, and hard work that defined their parents. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, Thomas took Penelope back to the spot by the river where he had found her all those years ago. It had become something of a pilgrimage for them, visiting once a year to remember how their story had begun. The river looked much the same, flowing serenely through the landscape, giving no indication of the violence and despair that had once unfolded on its banks. "I was thinking," Thomas said as they stood hand in hand watching the water, "about how easily things could have gone differently. If I had decided not to bring the children fishing that day, if James had been casting his line in a different spot, if we had been even an hour later finding you, so many small things that had to align perfectly for us to be standing here today. Fate," Penelope said softly. "Or providence or luck, whatever you want to call it, something brought us together and I will be grateful for it until the day I die. We have built a good life," Thomas said, pulling her close. "Better than good. Amazing. And it all started here, in the worst moment of your life leading to the best moments of mine." "Of ours," Penelope corrected, smiling up at him. "The best moments of ours." They kissed there by the river, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build something beautiful together. When they finally pulled apart and headed back to the wagon where their younger children waited, they walked with the easy confidence of people who knew exactly where they belonged. The years rolled on, bringing their share of challenges and changes. There were hard winters and dry summers, market fluctuations and difficult decisions. But through it all, the Quinn family remained strong, bound together by love and shared purpose. The children grew up and began lives of their own, though most stayed close to home, drawn by the magnetic pull of family. Mary married a teacher she met in San Francisco and brought him back to Nevada, where they started a school in Yerington. James took over more of the day-to-day ranch operations, eventually marrying a quiet, kind woman from a neighboring ranch. Theo and Timothy both showed interest in expanding into horse breeding, working together to build that side of the business. The younger 3 children were still finding their paths, but they did so surrounded by the support and encouragement of their large, loving family. Thomas and Penelope grew older gracefully, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening on their faces, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it grew stronger, refined by time and experience into something precious and enduring. They were grandparents now, their home often filled with the laughter of the next generation, and they embraced that role with joy. On a warm summer evening in 1902, 20 years after Thomas had pulled Penelope from the river's edge, they sat together on their porch as they had done countless times before. The house was quiet for once, all the children and grandchildren having returned to their own homes after a big family gathering. Penelope rested her head on Thomas's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "Do you remember what you said to me the first time I woke up?" she asked quietly. "I said a lot of things to you when you were unconscious," Thomas replied with a smile. "I am not sure which specific moment you mean. When I woke up and was terrified, you told me I was safe. You said no one would hurt me, and I believed you, even though I had no reason to trust anyone after what had happened. You kept that promise, Thomas. For 20 years, you have made me feel safe and loved and cherished. You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to live it." Thomas turned to face her, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "Penelope Quinn, loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You saved me too, you know. After Catherine died, I was just going through the motions, doing what needed to be done but not really living. You brought me back to life, reminded me what it was to feel joy and hope and love. Our life together has been everything I could have wanted and more than I ever dared to dream." They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 2 decades of love and commitment and shared experience. When they pulled apart, both were smiling, their eyes bright with happy tears. "To another 20 years, Penelope said, lifting an imaginary glass in a toast. "To forever," Thomas countered. "However long we have, I want to spend every moment with you," and they did. They lived long lives, surrounded by family and love, never taking for granted the precious gift they had been given in finding each other. Their story became legend in Yarrington, the tale of the woman left for dead who found love and family with the cowboy and his children who saved her. It was a story that gave hope to others, proof that even from the darkest moments could come the brightest light. When Thomas finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, Penelope held his hand and whispered her love and gratitude for the life they had shared. She followed him just 2 years later, her heart finally giving out after having loved so fully for so long. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their headstones simple but bearing inscriptions that told their story. Thomas Quinn, loving husband and father who chose kindness. Penelope Quinn, beloved wife and mother who chose to live. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to mourn them and celebrate them, sharing stories and memories that kept their spirits alive. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation Thomas and Penelope had built. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings when the light slanted golden across the range island, people swore they could see 2 figures sitting on the porch of the old ranch house, hands entwined, watching the sunset together just as they had done for so many years. Whether ghost or memory or simply the enduring power of love, no one could say for certain. But everyone agreed that if any love deserved to transcend death and time, it was the love between Thomas Quinn and the woman he had saved by the river, the woman who had saved him right back. Their legacy lived on not just in the children they had raised and the land they had worked, but in the example they had set of what it meant to choose love, to choose kindness, to choose each other every single day. In a wild, hard land that often demanded toughness and pragmatism, they had proven that gentleness and compassion were not weaknesses but strengths. They had shown that the worst moments of our lives do not have to define us, that healing is possible, and that love can bloom even in the most unlikely circumstances. The story of Thomas and Penelope Quinn became more than just their personal history. It became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the transformative power of compassion, and the enduring nature of true love. Parents told it to their children as a bedtime story. Teachers used it as an example in their lessons about character and courage. Old-timers swapped versions of it in saloons and general stores, each adding their own embellishments but never losing the essential truth at its core, because at its heart, it was a simple story. A good man found a dying woman and chose to help her. That woman chose to live and to love again despite her trauma. Together, they built a family and a life that enriched everyone around them. There were no grand heroics, no dramatic showdowns with the villains who had hurt Penelope, no miraculous interventions. Just ordinary people making good choices day after day, year after year, building something beautiful one small decision at a time. And perhaps that was the most powerful part of their story. It proved that heroism did not require grand gestures or exceptional circumstances. It could be as simple as stopping to help someone in need, as quiet as choosing to forgive and move forward, as ordinary as loving your family well. Thomas and Penelope had not set out to be remarkable. They had simply tried to be good, to be kind, to be true to themselves and each other. But in doing so, they had created something remarkable indeed. The ranch house still stood decades later, weathered but sturdy, a testament to the solid foundation on which it had been built. New families lived there now, but they honored the history of the place, maintaining the little family cemetery on the hill and keeping the flower garden Penelope had planted so many years ago. Sometimes tourists came through Yerington asking for directions to the Quinn Ranch, wanting to see the place where such a famous love story had unfolded. The river still flowed past that rocky bank where Penelope had nearly died, its waters cold and clear and eternal. Wildflowers bloomed there in the spring, bright spots of color against the harsh landscape, as though the earth itself wanted to commemorate what had happened there, the death that had not been and the life that had been born from those dark moments. In the end, Thomas and Penelope's story was not about the violence that had brought them together, but about the love that had grown from the ashes of that violence. It was not about victimhood, but about survival and thriving. It was not about darkness, but about light, not about despair, but about hope, not about hatred, but about love. And that was exactly as it should be, exactly as they would have wanted it. Because they had understood, perhaps better than most, that while we cannot always control what happens to us, we can control how we respond. We can choose to let our worst moments destroy us, or we can choose to use them as the foundation for building something better. We can remain trapped in the past, or we can step forward into the future with open hearts and willing hands. Thomas and Penelope had chosen love, had chosen life, had chosen each other. And in doing so, they had created a legacy that would outlive them by generations, a story that would continue to inspire and uplift long after their names had faded from memory. They had proved that no matter how dark things might seem, no matter how close to death we might come, there is always hope, always the possibility of rescue, of recovery, of redemption, always the chance that around the next bend in the river, love might be waiting. And so their story lived on, woven into the fabric of Yerington, Nevada, and the surrounding country. It became part of the mythology of the American West, taking its place alongside tales of cowboys and outlaws, pioneers and settlers, gold strikes and cattle drives. But unlike many of those stories that celebrated violence and conquest, the story of Thomas and Penelope celebrated something quieter but no less powerful: the human capacity for kindness, for resilience, for love. Years turned into decades, and decades into a century, and still the story persisted. It was adapted into plays and songs, written about in books and newspapers, passed down through family lines and community traditions. The details might change with each telling, but the heart of it remained the same. A woman left for dead, a man who chose to help, children who found room in their hearts for a new mother, a love that healed old wounds and created new joy. And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever lies beyond this life, Thomas and Penelope Quinn continued their love story, finally free from the constraints of time and flesh, but never free from the bonds they had forged in those precious years on a Nevada ranch. They were together still, as they had always meant to be, as they always would be, world without end. The sun set over the old Quinn ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, just as it had done for millions of years before and would do for millions of years to come. The river flowed past, eternal and indifferent. The mountains stood sentinel in the distance, ancient and unchanging. And in the ranch house, a new family sat down to dinner, carrying on the traditions established so long ago, adding their own chapter to a story that seemed to have no ending. Because some stories, the best ones, the truest ones, never really end. They just continue, passed from generation to generation, changing and growing but never dying. And the story of Thomas and Penelope Quinn was one of those stories. It had begun beside a river with an act of violence, but it had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. It had started with despair, but had transformed into hope. It had begun with one woman alone and dying, but had expanded to encompass children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. A whole family tree growing from that single moment of compassion beside the river. And if stories could have souls, if tales could have spirits, then surely the story of Thomas and Penelope Quinn lived on, breathing with every retelling, growing stronger with each generation that heard it and took its lessons to heart. It was a story about the best parts of being human, about our ability to rise above our circumstances, to choose love over fear, hope over despair, life over death. It was, in the end, a story about coming home. Penelope had found her home not in a place but in a person, in a family, in a life she had built from nothing after losing everything. Thomas had found his home again after years of grief, rediscovering joy and purpose through loving Penelope and watching their family grow. The children had found completeness, their family restored and expanded in ways they had never imagined, and we, hearing their story now, might find our own home in its message, that we are more resilient than we know, that kindness matters, that love heals, that second chances exist, that the worst day of our life might lead, through grace and choice and courage, to the best days of our life, that we are never so broken that we cannot be made whole again, never so lost that we cannot be found, never so alone that we cannot find family. This was the gift Thomas and Penelope Quinn gave to the world, not through grand gestures or public works, but simply by living their lives with love and integrity. They showed that ordinary people in ordinary circumstances could create something extraordinary through the simple act of choosing goodness every day. And in a world that often seemed determined to prove the worst about human nature, they stood as proof of our better angels, of the heights we could reach when we extended compassion to those who needed it most. Their story, beginning in darkness beside a river in 1882, and continuing through love and family and decades of shared life, was proof that happy endings were not just the stuff of fairy tales. They could happen to real people in the real world. They might require work and choice and courage, but they were possible. And that possibility, that hope, was perhaps the greatest legacy of all. So the story of Thomas Quinn and Penelope Lambert Quinn lived on, would always live on, a testament to the enduring power of love and the indomitable resilience of the human spirit. They had built their happy ending not despite the violence that had brought them together, but because they refused to let that violence define them. They had taken the worst moment and transformed it into a beginning rather than an ending. And in doing so, they had created something that would never die. A love story for the ages, a family that would continue for generations, and a legacy of hope that would inspire countless others to choose love, choose life, and choose to keep going even when all seemed lost. This was their story, complete and perfect and wholly their own. And it was, in every sense that mattered, a happily ever after.